So, what happens when a small nation gets caught between two giants? Today, we're diving into the story of Nepal, a country right at the heart of a new great game, where its very location has turned it into a critical piece on the geopolitical chessboard. Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll set the scene on the Himalayan chessboard. Then, we'll get into the great power game itself. After that, we'll look at Nepal's internal cracks, explore a few different ways the future could play out, and finally, we'll ask the big question: what is the decisive next move? You see, for centuries, Nepal's strategic position has been both its greatest advantage and its biggest liability. Its destiny is literally shaped by its geography. There's an old Nepalese proverb that just perfectly captures this: a yam between two boulders. It paints a picture of this fragile existence, constantly squeezed between two absolute giants, India to the south and China to the north. And today, those boulders are basically tectonic plates of global power. Now, on paper, Nepal practices a policy of non-alignment. It's even in their constitution. But what's really interesting here is that this isn't some high-minded ideological choice. Nope, it's a pragmatic, absolutely essential strategy for pure survival. And this brings us to the absolute core of our analysis today. Nepal's future isn't just about what outside powers want. It's about the dangerous dance between those external ambitions and the country's own deep internal weaknesses. That's what will ultimately decide its fate. So, how exactly does this game play out on the board? Let's break down the strategies of the three main players all vying for influence: India, China, and of course, the United States. Okay, so this gives you the high-level snapshot: each country's goals, the tools they're using, and the risks involved for Nepal. Now, let's dig into each one. First up, India. And this relationship is, well, it's complicated. On one hand, you've got what they call roti-beti, this deep cultural and family connection across an open border. But on the other hand, there's this long history of India playing the big brother, using its weight to apply pressure, which ironically often fuels anti-India sentiment in Nepal. And India's main lever? It's all economic. Just look at this number: 79%. That is a huge chunk of Nepal's exports going to India. It gives New Delhi a massive weapon. And we saw them use it back in 2015, when an unofficial blockade basically paralyzed Nepal's economy and, well, pushed it to start looking north, to China. Lately, the new battleground has become hydropower, and India played a masterstroke here. It put a policy in place saying it won't buy any electricity from projects in Nepal that have Chinese money in them. With one move, it neutralized China's biggest advantage, all that infrastructure funding, and forced Nepal to come back into India's orbit for its energy future. All right, now for China. Their strategy is all about big, visible projects, like the Pokhara International Airport. It was built with a $216 million Chinese loan, but it's really struggling to get off the ground, partly because India won't give it the air routes it needs. It really makes you ask, is this real development, or is it just a different kind of dependency? And the economic picture is just incredibly lopsided. You can see it right here. For every $1 of stuff Nepal sells to China, it buys almost $60 worth back. This isn't diversification. It's just deepening Nepal's dependence in a new direction. And then you have the US, kind of the wild card in all this. Their big $550 million MCC grant was a huge deal. It was finally ratified in 2022 after years of political drama. But there's a huge risk here. What if a new US administration just pulls the plug in 2025? A move like that would completely shatter American credibility and leave a giant vacuum that, you can bet, China would be more than happy to fill. And all of this brings us back to the heart of the matter. While all these big powers are making their moves, the real reason Nepal is so exposed is because of its own serious internal weaknesses. I mean, just start with the politics. 13 different governments in only 17 years. Think about that. With that kind of constant chaos, it's impossible to have any kind of long-term vision, which makes the country's leaders really easy targets for outside influence. Then there's the economy. It is dangerously dependent on money sent home from Nepalis working overseas. We're talking about a quarter of the entire GDP. Sure, it keeps families going, but it's really just a band-aid covering up the massive failure to create jobs at home. And the human cost of that failure is this massive exodus of young people. In just 1 year, more than 771,000 work permits were issued for youth to go abroad. The country is literally bleeding its most valuable resource, its own future. So when you put all these pieces together, the slow growth, the youth unemployment, the huge climate risks, what you get is this self-feeding cycle, a vulnerability vortex. Political chaos stops economic reform, the lack of jobs pushes young people out, and all of it makes the country weaker when the next disaster hits. This is the cycle that the big powers are exploiting. Okay, so given this really complex mix of outside pressure and internal weakness, what does the endgame look like? Let's walk through 3 possible future scenarios for Nepal. We see 3 main paths forward. The first is what we call Indian encirclement, where Delhi pretty much locks in its dominance. The second is China's embrace, which would be a really risky pivot toward Beijing. And the third, and maybe the most likely, is the dangerous balance. Basically more of the same precarious juggling act we see today. So in that first scenario, Indian encirclement, Nepal gets richer. It ties its economy, especially hydropower, completely to India. But that prosperity comes with a heavy price tag, the loss of its strategic independence. It would become a wealthier, but ultimately a less sovereign nation. In China's embrace, a fed-up Kathmandu decides to go all in with Beijing. Now, this could bring some rapid infrastructure growth for sure, but it also carries the massive risk of drowning in debt and turning Nepal from a buffer state into a tense, frontline state right in the middle of the India-China rivalry. And finally, the dangerous balance. This is where Nepal's chaotic political games just continue. It cleverly avoids getting captured by any one power, but the price for that is stagnation. The country stays stuck in that vulnerability vortex, weak, dependent, and always on edge. Which brings us to our final and most critical question. In this high-stakes game, who actually holds the winning cards? The ultimate takeaway from all this is that Nepal's salvation isn't about choosing India or China or the West. The only real winning strategy is to look inward. Building political stability, creating an economy that actually works for its people, those are the only moves that can give the country any real freedom to act. So, while the great powers are all moving their pieces around the board, the most decisive move really does belong to Nepal. But the question that hangs over everything is, can the country get its own house in order before one of those outside players finally declares checkmate?